Let's get the new recording going. Oh, ran out of talkie time there. Just a lot of talking with that piece. I'm going to have to put that screen up next time. Okay. After show time. We can out. So here's the thing. We've now got, that was a new format for the regular show where we just shotgun questions in. I think I had just the right amount. I had a couple more we didn't even get to. So was that, let me know, send me a note at the Professor Messer website. There's a contact us link at the top. You can tweet to me. I'm reading my Twitter all the time. Or you can mention the chat room that if that was good or not. I may send out a little survey monkey or something to everybody who was on the mailing list just to get your perspective of whether you liked it or not. The replay will be up. You'll be able to watch that as well throughout the time. So I'm going to open up the phone lines. This is sort of a time after we do the official show. This is a time we just kind of answer questions or talk about anything. I've got a lot of things going on. Last week we talked about building a PC. So I ordered a bunch of PC parts. In the chat room, somebody asked if the Security Plus is getting updated or changed. It already has. Go out to CompTIA's website and look at their Security Plus settings, the SY0401. You can either take either. You can take the 301 or the 401. There's overlap for both of them. You can take either one of them until December 31st, where the 301 exam will be retired. And from that point on, the only one you can take is the 401. And they do that, as I mentioned, so that if you're working on the 301, they don't pull the rug out from underneath you and haha, you got to learn something new. No, you can continue to take the 301, and it doesn't matter which one you take, you get exactly the same certification. So very, very simple to do something like that. All right, very quickly, let me move some things around here. All right, and get this piece done. Let's go to the phone lines since folks finally calling in. We've got someone from the 937 area code. Are you there, caller?
Hello.
Hello, caller. Who's speaking?
My name's Garrett Schumacher.
Hey, Garrett, how are you? You've called before, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
I recognize the name.
Times.
How are you, sir?
All right.
What can we do for you today?
Well, I just wanted to let you know again, I have the A Plus, Network Plus, and Security Plus already. I just got the 301, got the Network Plus and Security Plus in April, and I'm thanking you. I've got your study guides for the Network Plus and Security Plus.
That's great.
But I was interested in building my own gaming computer. I was curious, how many graphics cards could I use on a motherboard? Because I was looking at a PC gaming magazine last night, and it looked like they had several of them on one motherboard. So I didn't know if I could use more than one, or what's the best one to use.
Holy cow. Is that... I've been doing this recently, so of course I haven't built a computer in forever. And my son came to me, and my son really loves gaming. One of my sons came to me. He says, Dad, I want to build a computer, or I want to get a gaming computer. And I said, you can get a gaming computer, but you're going to build it. And we're going to pick everything out, and we're going to figure out why we picked out all these different components, and then we're going to put it together. It's kind of a father-son thing. We're going to put together this computer, and we're going to document it. We're going to tape. I say tape. We're going to record everything. We're going to record to tape. I'm going to find an old camera. We're going to put it on tape. We're going to record everything. And we're going to make a YouTube video out of it. We'll do a YouTube video on what we chose and why, and we'll do a YouTube video on the actual putting it together just to see how it went. And there's so many options available, and so many things you can do with it. And from a video card perspective, it even gets a little more complicated because there's different options in video. Do we use a single video card? Do we use one that is there? And there's different formats for doing this. Do we use multiple video cards? There's a format for multiple video cards for SLI, another format called Crossfire. So it depends on which manufacturer of video card you're getting. You may be getting, are you going GeForce or are you going Radeon? So you've got to make all these decisions about what you're going to do and how you want to do it. And I think some of the best places you can go, it's kind of like what we did. We went online and we just started reading. And you have to find some really good sites to do it. We started at PC Part Picker. I talked about this last week. We went to PC Part Picker and we started building out what we wanted inside of the system. What processor do we want? We sort of started with the motherboard And then we kind of backtrack to the processor, and then everything else got built out around that. Because once you have the motherboard, you know exactly what kind of memory you're going to get. You know exactly the CPU you're going to get, or at least the options available to you. And then, but these things, some of these things stand alone. So your specific question was about video cards. Which video card do I get? And for ours, we chose the EVGA makes this. It's a GeForce GTX 770 series video card. This happens to be their 2 gig super clock video card that we ended up getting. And it's a combination of performance, and the better the card, the more expensive the card. The more memory in the card, the faster the card, the more you're going to pay. That's just sort of the nature of cards. So on my motherboard, I could get an EVGA 12G P4 3990KR, which has 12 gig of memory and a 705 megahertz clock. And those I can get right now on Amazon. I'm not kidding, for $2,999.99. So,
wow.
No, okay, no $3,000 video card for you. Okay, maybe not. But on PC Part Picker, I can scroll down and see where are the price performance differences. And you can start seeing, and generally speaking, the higher numbers, like a GTX 760 is generally a little bit slower than the 770. And I say generally, there are, of course, differences between these standards and different types of memory and different clock speeds. And I get that, and we can all fight amongst ourselves on that piece. But generally, you could see the pricing is what's going to drive that piece. You can sort by price and figure out those pieces. One of the best places I go, though, because you're going to have to make a decision on what do I even get, and how do I even work down the line of figuring out which piece is going to work proper for me. So if you go to the website Tom's Hardware, which is tomshardware.com, that's a very good site to start with. Because they have the latest articles on processors, motherboards, memory, graphics cards, because obviously graphics cards is an important part of this. And they even have different sections on gaming. They have different sections on phones. It's a great website just for gathering information. So if you're trying to find, I'm on their website right now. You'll see this on the replay or when it catches up on your side. You can go to graphics, and it lists out. In fact, they have, as soon as I get rid of the ad, everybody got to enjoy, they've got best graphics cards for the money, June 2014. They update these every month. So if you want to see what the best graphics cards are, great. If you want to compare some of the newest graphics card, they've got another one that compares the GeForce GTX 780M, 770M, 765M. They compare it versus the Radeon HD 8970M. Boy, you get into real geeky conversations with all these model numbers, don't you? But I found that to be a fantastic site for trying to find and decipher first what all these differences are, and then start doing some comparing and contrasting. Because it's very hard to find somewhere you can really trust on the internet and get a real good example, because people will put all kinds of things in forums. Oh, it works great for me. It doesn't work great for me. It's got great performance. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. You can do that all day. So I recommend those two sites for you to start with. Go to PC Part Picker, cipher through, and it filters things out for you and sift through all those pieces and figure out how those things work, and then compare those to a site like Tom's Hardware to really understand what you're looking at. We went through 4 or 5 different motherboards and processors because we looked at it and said, is this what we want to do? Let's see what Tom's Hardware says, and let's see what the specs on the motherboard are. I don't know if that works. Let's get a newer generation of motherboards. There's generally, for the Intel motherboards, there's chipsets we can look at. So we wanted to get a newer chipset. When you get to a newer set of chipsets and you look at all the motherboards that support that chipset, there's certain CPUs that will only fit. So it's this tumbling block that everything seems to fall into place after that point. That's where I would recommend you do this. And I'll send out the link that has what we finally built. For those of you wondering, we selected an Intel Core i7-4790, which is one that works on the latest motherboard, the latest motherboard, the 97 series motherboard, 97Z, I think it is, from Intel. And we ended up getting the Asus Maximus 7 Hero, which is a very nice gaming motherboard. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. We're putting it together right after we're done here. My son's been champing at the bit and saying, when are we going to do this, Dad? Well, I'll get the camera out and we will do that, I promise. So hopefully that will help you, give you a place to go with some of those things.
So PCPartPicker.com and Tom's Hardware.
That's the place. You can't go wrong with either of those. And if you wanted to separately watch or read or try to soak in some additional details, out on the TWIT network is This Week in Hardware, I think it's called. Somebody can spot check me in the chat room. But This Week in Hardware, they really go into some of the newest hardware. You could almost rewind about 3 months and watch some of the 3-month-old ones. This Week in Computer Hardware on twit.tv. And at that point, some of the things we're looking at now had just come out, 3 or 6 months ago. And you can kind of get a feel for the nomenclature, for how they talk about it. That's another good resource. It's not quite as specific as PC Part Picker, not quite as specific as Tom's Hardware. But if you're trying to learn more about doing this and refining and what do I buy next, that's a great place to get into the cycle of what's going on in the industry.
I see. Yes, I was wondering, what would be a good computer screen, or would I hook up a gaming computer to a computer screen, or just use one of those big high-def televisions?
We literally made that conversation last night, and again, Tom's Hardware's another place to go. They have monitor reviews. We wanted to get a gaming system because when you get into gaming, it's a little bit different than a screen you would buy for your living room. Generally, those are HD. I've got a big one that's in front of me, for instance. It's hard to see, but in front of me in my studio, I've got like a 60-inch monitor there that I do use to watch things, but it's also used right now for my video switcher. And when they get that big with what I call just 1080p resolution, it's kind of grainy. And it doesn't have a high refresh rate or a refresh rate that you might want if you're getting into gaming. Gaming on an LCD screen needs to have a very fast response time. And I shouldn't say refresh rate. It really is just how often the screen is updated on the LCD. But you want to get one that's maybe 120 hertz. The screen will update itself 120 times in a second or faster. They've got 144 megahertz LCD, LED type screens out there. It's a science unto itself, but you could absolutely get away with just plugging it into a regular television. I just don't think for gaming you'd be happy with it. You'd see a lot of blurring.
I see.
So that sounds like fun. I'm looking forward to see how that turns out. And if you put together one on PC Part Picker, send us a note. Let us know how it goes.
I will do that. Will I need a good sound card too, or what comes on the motherboard just suitable for that? Most
of the motherboard ones tend to be pretty good, actually. The one on the motherboard we're getting is actually quite good. You may find that these days you don't need a separate audio card like you used to in the old days.
I see, but video cards are here to stay for a while. Okay.
Yeah, the video card, you're definitely going to want one that is not integrated into the motherboard. It's a separate device with a bunch of memory on it and its own CPUs and a bunch of fans, and it gets hot and it's awesome.
Right. I was wondering, so if you use several of them and they each have their own fan, that would kind of make things kind of congested inside the whole computer chassis.
You're going to... And there's the science. You're building a computer. You got to think about thermal. You got to think about the heat. You got to think about how many fans you're using. Are these fans going to be loud? Do we need to get quieter fans? Do we need to get bigger fans? Do we need a separate fan or a different kind of heat sink on the CPU? Do we need additional fans blowing across the memory? These are the fun parts of putting together a computer.
Yes, and I've looked at Newegg last night, so I picked my chip. So I think I'm going to use the Intel i7 chip. And
perfect.
Looking at certain motherboards, whatever motherboards compatible with that kind of chip. And then I was thinking like the GTX, the GT Force gaming card. Yes,
yep.
Those look pretty nice.
Yep,
so.
Go out to PC Part Picker. You will have a blast.
Sounds great. Thank you for telling me about that website.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling, Garrett, and good luck with that. We'd love to hear how it goes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Take care.
Yes, you too.
We're going to have a good time today. I'm going to grab this camera, take it off of here, and we're going to put those things together on there. There's Jenny built one last week. I'm going to pull that up to look at later. That link, I got to send out my link so everybody can see that one as well on that piece. Let's go to, since we have the calls going, let's go to the next one is the 210 area code. Are you there, caller?
Yes, this is David Small. How you doing?
Hey, Davis, how are you? I'm doing fine. Thanks for calling. What can we do for you today?
I am studying for Network Plus and my CASP.
Oh.
I am building a router, and I was told that I could use the program PFC Sense.
Yep.
Is that you can use a basic computer to have a high-speed router?
You can. PF Sense is what that's called. It is an open source firewall that does firewalling and routing and NATing and everything else in one. You may want to turn down that audio in the back. We can kind of hear it bleeding back through.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, PF Sense is great. There's even some live DVDs or live CDs built for PF Sense. It is a Linux-based system. You could even do it with a single card in a computer if you wanted to. Multiple cards is actually preferable. It's got some nice capabilities on it. It has not just the routing piece, which is great, and it supports a number of routing protocols, but it also does firewalling, so you can set up some basic firewall rules too. If you were just using it as a router, obviously you could just set it up and allow all to pass through. But it's got some great capabilities, well supported in the industry as well. It's called PF Sense. For those of you who'd like to try that, it's Papa Fox Sense, Sierra Echo November Sierra Echo.org. I've got it up on the screen, pfsense.org. There, we can barely see that. There we go, pfsense.org. That is a fabulous one. I think you can have a lot of fun with that.
Okay, yeah, because today is my actual day off. I'm in the military, so today is my off day, and I'm trying to play around with as much as I can.
Yeah, that one, in fact, if you go to the website, there's a section on getting started, and they take you through the entire thing about installation, configuration, getting it up and running. They've got a great install guide on the website that takes you through the documentation on their wiki and says, here's what you need to do. Here's, if you were installing it from scratch, here's what you need to do. But I bet if you go PF Sense and you Google a live CD, there are plenty of live CD versions out there. If you, under the download section on the PF Sense website is a live CD they've already got available and ready to go. So that would be a great place to go to just download it. Makes it easy.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're doing an excellent job.
That's a lot of fun. Good luck with that. I think you're going to get a lot out of it.
All right. You have a great day.
Thanks, Davis. Bye-bye. There's putting together a firewall and a router and doing it yourself in a system. They make it so easy with the live CDs. Why not? Why wouldn't you get that up and running and work with it? Let's go to the 773 area code, or at least one. I've got two, so we'll see which one answers the phone. You probably heard the beep when you picked up. Are you there, caller?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Got a great line there. What's your name?
Darvish.
Hey, thanks for calling. What can we do for you? What questions do you have for us today?
Yeah, Professor, I was interested to know about the new thing called Bitcoin. Are you familiar with that technology that they use in the computers?
Indeed, I am.
And is it legal or just for practice? Can you say that at home and you start a business like that?
Is it?
Do you think is a credible thing?
It is. Well, that's two different questions. Is it legal and is it credible? There are a number of questions regarding Bitcoin. For those of you that have been sort of following this over the last year or so, Bitcoin is a method. It's a type of money that people use to purchase things. And what's interesting about it is it's effectively untraceable. It was created for people to be able to use to barter or purchase things from each other without having to know who that person is or even know where the money went. Obviously, there's a lot of people with privacy concerns certainly want to be able to do this. But of course, the benefit of the privacy concern also has the other side, which is if people are buying things and you have no way to track that or trace it, you run into situations where now the ability to purchase things that are illicit becomes much easier because there's no money, there's no credit card to trace back, and so there are people using this for both good reasons and for bad reasons. And in a way, it's very similar to the money we have now. Obviously, law enforcement hates that. They think that's awful. Why would anybody do this? Well, because there's people watching. Privacy advocates love it because it's not up to you what I'm doing with my money. It's my money, and I should be able to do anything I'd like. Bitcoin itself is a type of money that was effectively created out of thin air. A series of algorithms was used and is still being used to create Bitcoin itself and kind of print new money, if you will. And in fact, Bitcoin's not the only one. There are a lot of different electronic or digital monetary methods, digital wallets that are being created to be able to do this. Bitcoin is one that was the one that was out the first. I wouldn't say the first, but certainly one that was out and most popular initially. And there's other types that are being created too. But it's no different than using chickens or using pigs. I want to buy something, I'll give you 2 chickens for that cow. It's exactly the same scenario. So it's perfectly legal to use. There's nothing illegal about it, just as there's nothing illegal about chickens. The illegal part comes when people are using it for illegal things, which has nothing to do with the money. It has to do with how they're using the money. A lot of people are starting to support Bitcoin, though. On the backside of this, I have a process when somebody buys a DVD course from me. I don't sit here and burn it on my computer and package it up and send it. That would look awful. I would not have a very professional thing. So I have a third party do this for me, and I pay them to burn it, package it up, and mail it for me, and they accept payment in Bitcoin. I don't use Bitcoin myself, but if I did, I could pay them in that format. They actually give a discount if you pay them in Bitcoin. How about that? It is a little controversial in the way it works. It's also not supported generally by anything. So if you go look at the prices of Bitcoin, because the prices are effectively determined on the demand for the money, the prices for it are go up and down wildly most recently, because if there's any worry about being able to use this money, and you've got a collection of Bitcoin here, what if suddenly the Bitcoin becomes less valuable? Well, then I won't be spending as much, or I'd have to spend more of it or get more of it to buy my goods and services. And so we see these huge ups and downs associated with it. It seems to be very much related to worries in the news, very much like the stock market. It's a remarkably volatile monetary system right now. But it certainly is encouraging that we're able to do this with the technology we have. And who knows what's going to happen. Maybe this is something we'll start to use a lot more as time goes on. It's really up to you on whether you want to accept that risk and receive the value of being able to purchase things with a lot more privacy. Hopefully that's given you some perspective on using Bitcoin. And then when I start looking at it, probably the reason I haven't used it is I just don't have a compelling need to at the moment. I'm a relatively easy person to see online and what's going on. I probably should be a little bit more concerned about privacy on what we're doing. And with other types of things other than money, I absolutely am concerned about privacy and what we're doing with it. I think we're just going to have to wait and see what goes on with that. Obviously, the more people use it, the more valuable it becomes and the more stable it becomes. Let's try the other 773 area code. Are you there, caller?
Hello?
Hello. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Eddie Rodriguez.
Hey, Eddie. Thanks for calling.
In the chat. Thanks.
What question?
I have a question about right now in my internship. I'm working with a virtual server, and one of my tasks is to connect my Windows 8 client virtual machine to my SPS 2011 server machine.
Aha.
And I need to connect their domains. So I need to route their DNS to each other so I can essentially control the Windows 8 client
right.
with my SPS 2011 client.
Yes.
How do I do this? I'm really curious about this.
This is the key the key part of putting together your own domain. So in your particular case, and we were just talking about this, I was showing off the live practice labs earlier, and the live practice labs had a Windows domain server. It had clients already configured. The clients were already part of the domain, and probably more importantly, the DNS configuration was already configured amongst all of those things. And so you didn't have to install it. But if you install it yourself, you have to do all of these things. And unfortunately in Windows, it's really actually much easier to get this going than you think. And for those of you that are listening in that have never put together your own Windows domain, here's a very quick example or quick breakdown of how this Windows domain works. When you build out a Windows domain, you give it a domain name. So we might call, in fact, if you go to my Windows videos, I have a Windows domain called SGA. Now this SGA, that's its Windows domain, but the way Windows works and finds everybody in the network these days, it used to work in an old protocol called WINS, the Windows Internet Domain Services, I think it was called. So WINS, we don't use anymore. They use NetBIOS. It was clunky. There were much better ways to do name resolution called DNS. We all know what DNS is. So Microsoft said, why are we doing this and banging our head against the wall with WINS? Let's use DNS. Great idea. So when you create a Windows domain, you also create a fully qualified domain name server name for that domain. And if you look at a lot of examples that Microsoft has, they always use the domain suffix of .local. I mean, you can create any suffix you want with DNS. A lot of the times we're so used to using .com, .org, .net, but when you start creating internal networks that will never have these names used outside of your network, it's very common and a bit of a best practice these days to call it .local. So if you were to look at my domain, it would be sga.local is the fully qualified domain name for that. So here is the hook. Here's the key and the problem, though, is for you to be able to join a client with that domain, because that's the way it works in Windows. You have an administrator effectively associate a client with the domain, and it becomes part of the domain. It becomes a very easy thing for the domain administrator to be able to manage. That's one of the great things about Windows, and probably one of the reasons that Windows is so widespread in these large organizations is because once you're part of the domain, you can do anything you want to that machine. It's great from an administrative perspective. But I connect to that domain and use that domain based on the DNS name. And when we are setting up our computers, like the ones that I have in front of me, all these computers are not on a domain. These computers, there we go. These computers are connecting to my cable modem and using a DNS server. I'm using Google's DNS server. I'm using 8.8.8.8. Well, if I say, please connect this client to sga.local, it goes out to Google's domain server and says, please direct me to the IP address of sga.local. And it's really going to go to DC1 or whatever I call that server, .sga.local. And Google says, what in the world are you talking about? What is .local? I have no idea what you're talking about. Boom, sends it back to you and says, sorry, I can't help you. So you have a bit of a problem now, is how do you still use the internet but still know where the domain name server is and be able to connect to it? And the way you do it in Windows is on that same domain server, you also install a DNS server on that same. And in fact, it's the default when you install a domain server. One of the things it tells you is, hey, do you want to make this a DNS? And you certainly should. And if you're only creating one, you absolutely have to. And you build that. And in the Windows configuration, you point that DNS to whatever your external DNS server is. So your domain server's DNS now, for instance, will talk to Google, and you reconfigure your client machine to use the DNS that's running now on that particular DNS server, which is also your domain server. So you're effectively changing the path of DNS. You're saying first check in to the domain controller's DNS, and if it's not there, the domain controller will go ask Google and ultimately get the answer back to you. And that's where you will, most people when they're setting up their domain controllers, because I see them and they'll come into the chat on my website, is they'll set up their domain controllers and say, well, I can't attach a client because you didn't point the client to the domain server's DNS. You have to change the client configuration, or make the domain controller your DHCP server, which then supplies it with that DNS information. That's the key. And then, of course, you have to make sure your domain controller is set up to talk back to your external DNS so that you can still have everybody go out to Google and Yahoo and ESPN and CNN and all those sites. Does that help? I went way around because I know you've already done a lot of that, but does that give you some perspective anyhow?
Yes. I was able to configure it myself after a lot of troubleshooting, I would say. But you definitely explained the more out-of-the-box explanation. It helps me a lot.
The good part about it is it's sort of a rite of passage that I and everyone else does when they first install their very first domain controller and they say, client, go connect, and it doesn't happen. And that's okay, because then you start trying to figure it out. Like I was saying earlier, you never really learn until something is broken. And at that point, when you're fixing it and understanding what's not working right, what is the communication? Let me pull up a packet capture. Let me read about it on Microsoft's website. That's where you really start learning. And that's when it becomes a little more fun. And now it's ingrained in your head. You'll never forget it.
Oh, yeah. And from now on, if I ever have to do that again, I know, okay, I must make this DNS server route to my servers. I mean, this DNS client to my DNS server. And then that has to match, my DNS server has to point to itself so it can connect to itself,
That's it.
The internet, so they'll all be all one.
And that's when we need to get into an enterprise that has a domain. There's so many different ways to do it. Some people don't run their DNS server on a domain controller. It's a separate DNS server, but that DNS server has the domain controller IP addresses inside of it, and you're maybe even use a separate DHCP server, which happens to have configured the DNS settings for that DNS server so that people can then connect to the domain controller. You can see how you can take each one of those components and spread them out to other devices and create redundancy and have them in other locations throughout the world and really create a completely unique configuration depending on what size your network happens to be. But it's a lot of fun to get running.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, do you have another question for us?
Hopefully my interns will be watching. I was going to say, hopefully my interns that were routed to this video, to this live stream, I'll say, were watching this and they learned with me today.
Aha, that's how you do it. They can work with that piece. Thanks for calling, Eddie.
No problem. Have a good. Thank you for the stream. It's really nice.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Take care. There's a lot with Microsoft domains. They're a lot of fun to work with. It's one of those things, though, you really have to get into, because now think about the domains and some of the things I do during the week. There's multiple forests, especially when customers will acquire another company. Now you've got two domains. How do you squeeze them together, creating trust relationships? It's remarkable. A lot of things you can do with that. Let's go to the 559 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name?
Hello, my name is Adam from Australia.
Hello, Adam from Australia. How are you, sir? And what question do you have for us today?
Good, thank you. And I thought we could talk a little bit about some ISP silliness that's been going on with net neutrality and things like that in America.
Oh boy, is there a lot going on with net neutrality? How does that affect you if you're in Australia? Because you have your own challenges with privacy and filtering on the internet.
In Australia right now, we have more of an infrastructure problem right now. The government can't seem to decide between fiber to the premises or fiber to a node and then copper to the house.
It's sort of been an ongoing thing in Australia.
A big mess of it.
If I can interrupt just for a moment, for those that have sort of followed infrastructure in Australia, it's always been a concern. Australia itself has been a country with a lot of resources, but it's so big, and a lot of the populations are in these areas around the edges. But somehow you have to connect them across areas of a country where there's not a lot of people. It's very sparse. And so there's always been challenges with bandwidth. And you were sort of getting into this, but I'd love to hear how things are going now. Is all of your infrastructure government owned, or is it owned by private companies? And how does that work?
Well, right now, a lot of the copper sort of backbone is owned by the main ISP in Australia, which is Telstra.
Yep.
But the new fiber backbone right now is government owned currently. But the previous government wanted to do just direct fiber to the premises, so no sort of interchanging of media, direct fiber to the premises, full. They were talking about starting it off at full 100 megabits per second and moving up to gigabit connectivity later on.
Nice.
But the new government had different ideas, and they thought it would be a good idea to implement fiber to the node and then copper to the premises, which would be obviously significantly slower. That copper would cause a huge bottleneck, and their plan would be about 25 megabits now and 50 megabits later. So obviously that caused a lot of anger in the IT community, and it's just been one big mess. And right now they're actually having trouble because they can't work out how to power the nodes currently. They can't find a good power solution for the nodes. So it's just a huge mess.
This is one of the things that we've not even gotten into in the United States. In fact, the private companies, the private ISPs or the private carriers have done a very, very good job of preventing the government or the privatization, not privatization, but the government takeover or use of a government-owned infrastructure. A lot of people, and it's sort of where we are in the United States right now, is almost 100% of the infrastructure, very, very little of the infrastructure anywhere is government owned. Almost all of it, and I'd say 99.99. There might be a small city somewhere in the mountains that decided to put their own fiber and use it. There's very few cases of that, quite honestly, because there is such a large lobbying arm by the large telecommunications companies to prevent laws or create laws preventing even local governments of creating their own networks, which in many ways really almost makes sense. And in fact, in Australia, you have government-owned fiber or copper in the ground. Now it's just a matter of figuring out what kind you're going to put there and how it's going to work. Of course, there are trade-offs to that. One might think that now we're getting outside of the scope of a third-party entity that's all based on profit providing our internet connection. But in the cases of Australia and other places, the government owning the infrastructure also means that the government can now filter the infrastructure for governmental reasons or for good reasons. So there also is kind of that privacy or net neutrality. And you mentioned net neutrality, that neutral piece of how do you simply have somebody create a pipe, just create the road, but allow anybody to drive their cars on it becomes a bit of a sticky wicket. It's a very, very complex set of things that you need to manage. In the United States, we've gone with the idea, or we've evolved in the idea of let's have third parties create the infrastructure, but then let's have the government provide those third parties with the balance or create a way to keep things neutral. And as we're seeing in the United States most recently, the telcos are kind of winning that war. They want to make it unbalanced so that certain traffic will go fast, other traffic will go slow, and then who gets to pay? And that's the real challenge. It's obviously an enormous challenge that I have as a small business owner and somebody who creates a very high bandwidth product. I'm already paying for using a network, and the people receiving it are already paying for using a network. So how do we balance this out of the bandwidth requirements and costs versus using the technology itself? And I don't know that there's a real clear answer of where to go, but it's certainly a challenge here. How are things evolving in Australia or are things evolving in Australia from a network neutrality perspective? How's that handled?
Right now it's actually not too bad. Some ISPs do it better than others, obviously. Australia, because this is more going into sort of piracy, but since Hollywood seems to have this distribution problem where they say, America gets this on time, but for some reason Australia doesn't get it for another month.
Right.
And that's why there seems to be a lot of piracy in Australia, and a lot of ISPs seem to be Hollywood's police now. I think they seem to be ratting out a lot of people to Hollywood and things like that, and it's sort of a bit of an issue, but apart from that, there's been no real, or at least not that I've noticed, no real slowdowns or anything like that. But if there was, you can generally get around that stuff with a VPN anyway.
And that's kind of the problem, is that the idea of creating a digital rights management or restrictions themselves just is another technological puzzle to be solved, and in fact, most people are solving it. It has always surprised me in today's time frame, this world we live in, where you are watching a live stream that I'm doing in Tallahassee, Florida, and you're watching it effectively immediately in Australia. Why in the world there is this huge delay at getting such media that these days is provided digitally, like movies, to somewhere like Australia? It's a download overnight. You've certainly got the pipes in the ocean to make that happen. We don't have to put it on a ship and wait for the winds to carry it down to Australia any longer. You've got amazing infrastructure. You've got companies that are doing this and do a fantastic job with technology. It just doesn't make sense at all that that's the case, and yet they still are working that kind of old school way of, no, we bring it out at this country first and that country second and that country third. And I understand it's not as easy as what I'm sounding it to make. There are legal issues. There are concerns with how people use the product. We could have another live stream just on piracy and how it affects different organizations. But somebody needs to kind of hurry things up. It doesn't make sense to me at all that there's such a delay with getting those things, because as you've seen, it almost promotes people wanting that content and seeing it as soon as they can. And I'm guilty for doing the same thing with content that is on YouTube that I know is copyrighted, that somebody put there, but I want to see that show that they created in England that I can't see because it's here. I want to see something that was produced in Australia that I normally can't see here. It might be a cricket match. It might be an Australian show that they don't show over here. It's copyrighted. It shouldn't be on YouTube, I'm almost certain, but it's there until somebody complains about it. It's a challenge, and it's a problem we've still got to deal with, along with everything else that's going on.
Yeah. Another thing just before I go, I want to make a quick comment about the sort of another moment of incompetence during this whole situation, because obviously there's a lot of rural communities in Australia. I myself live in the city, but there's a lot of rural communities, and in the meantime, what they were planning on doing is they were planning on providing some satellite connectivity for sort of farm areas, rural areas, and things like that. And what they ended up doing is they didn't end up supplying enough bandwidth for everyone, so it ended up being a case where, 40,000 people were paying $60 a month for dial-up speeds.
Wow.
That was a bit of a boo-boo there, but yeah, it's just been one big mess, really.
I think the government will figure it out. The government acts slowly around the world. Doesn't matter what government you're talking with. There's a lot of bureaucratic things that have to go through. That's a really good example of one, quite honestly. And it's one of those things that you need to get smart people involved and working with the government and moving them along, because quite honestly, the government don't have all the answers either. The decisions are made by those that show up, and it works the same whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Australia. That's just the nature of government.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thanks for calling. Had I known you were going to call, I would have worn my Melbourne Demon shirt, Go D, which probably isn't the best choice, but that's what I'm going with because I really like the logo. So thanks for calling, and let us keep updating us. I want to know how things go down there.
All right. Yeah, that's fine. I'll call again.
Take care, Adam.
All right. You too. Bye.
There's so much going on. We could do literally live streams of now. I've always thought I could do a daily show, a call-in show like this one, just an hour long, where we talk about topics like Bitcoin, net neutrality, because there's always something going on. This week was Apple's announcements, new programming languages. You've got a lot of new technologies going out. There's a lot going on with other technology companies and valuations and VCs and other aspects of that. It's remarkable how this industry works. But we'll go to 661 area code. Are you there, caller?
Yes. How are you doing this morning, Professor?
How are you? This is Anthony.
This is Anthony.
How are you, sir?
I'm okay. Last week when you were doing your CompTIA A+ study group,
yes.
Remember I was telling you I was having a problem seeing you?
Yes.
Right afterward, I was trying to get the information out of my computer, and it blue screened on me, and I I've been having a problem trying to get the information now.
On that computer, it crashed. And what do you mean you're having a problem getting that information? Is it starting up?
I put it, it keeps looping. It loops back and forth, and I've gone and tried to do the F8 to go into the command prompt so I could check to see what was going on. It seems to be that the boot rec is completely corrupted.
Sounds suspicious to me as well. Is this which version of Windows is this?
XP.
Okay. Oh boy. Yes. All right. So have you tried rebuilding any of the boot records or the master boot record?
Every time I try to rebuild the master boot record, I go to like F8, then I go to what do you call it? Safe mode with command prompt.
Mm-hmm.
It won't go in there. I try to boot from a CD.
Yep.
It won't boot from there. I don't have a XP recovery disk, and I think that's probably what I would need.
Not necessarily. In fact, using the operating system recovery disk, it's a very specialized term, is one that will restructure the hard drive layout to how it was originally, but it removes all your data. So that's not necessarily the best choice either. There is, it's not named this in Windows XP, but it is named something similar to this in Windows 7 and Windows 8. And what I've done in the past, and it really depends on how far it goes during the boot up process, but if are you at least seeing the Windows logo pop up?
Yes, I am. But then right after that, it boots to a blue screen, and then it goes back into the boot again. So here's what's useful about that is that it's at least getting a master boot record that points it to a boot sector that points to something relating to Windows, and it at least boots up a Windows logo, which means that not necessarily that your hard drive is pristine, but it appears that that startup process dealing with boot sectors is okay. So I don't think your problem is necessarily related to rebuilding the MBR or rebuilding a particular partition's boot sector. One of the things that may help in Windows is to simply install Windows on top of itself. This may be a quick and easy thing. Now, ideally, we would boot it into a command line. We'd poke around with the boot files. We'd see how it's configured. Maybe it's a boot.ini issue, and we can modify the boot.ini to point to a correct Windows configuration. The blue screen certainly is the thing that's kind of telling me that something about a Windows system file or startup file perhaps is not as it should be. But if you install Windows XP over an existing Windows XP system, it simply reinstalls all the operating system files, but it leaves everything else in place. I'm not talking about removing the partition and putting a new partition on. I'm simply saying install Windows XP on the existing partition and have it do that. So you really have to know what you're doing. You want to be very careful you don't delete anything when you do that. But that's a very simple way to kind of get Windows back to a good configuration without deleting any of your programs or applications or files that are on the rest of the hard drive. So what you're saying is put the XP Home Edition disk in, let it run through all the files, and when it says, you want to continue to partition, then just stop it there?
Yeah, you would not remove any partitions. When it gets to that point, say, where do you want to install Windows? Right there on the existing partition and right in the existing directory that says probably C:\Windows. Yep. And just run through a normal installation of that to be able to have it reinstall all the Windows operating system files onto the computer. And it won't modify anything else that's on the computer, but it might get you booted up. Now, ultimately, you may just want the files, and maybe it's time to grab the hard drive, stick it in a hard drive chassis. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, and just pull the files off of it and load it up onto a different system. But if you have an extra hard drive, that may be ultimately, because if there's any data on that drive, I'm always concerned whenever you're making a change like that you're going to delete something. And if you're really concerned there's pictures or there's video or things you want to keep, it may just be smarter to pull the drive, put it in an external chassis, and reload from scratch.
Okay, that's what my idea was, is just to take the files out onto an external hard drive.
Yep.
boot up Windows 7 Home Edition and then put the files back on there.
It's a little more work, but it's safer. And I tend to lean more towards safer. If at that point you got everything back and you just wanted to put that drive back in the computer and play around with it, maybe that's the process you go through.
Okay. All right. I have a docking station, so
yeah, that'd be perfect.
I think I'm going to try it again with the docking station and see if I can take the files and put it on the external hard drive and then just boot up to Windows 7 and then try to put the stuff back on into the documents. I've lost all my contacts, which is crazy.
Now, at that point, also once you're up on Windows 7, you've moved everything over, put some lighter fluid on the Windows XP DVD, and I think you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Set it aflame.
Well, that was, I was doing it in accordance to the fact that Windows XP is not having any updates or patches, and I was waiting for your program to be over so I could just go ahead and do that. And just as if just before you finish,
of course,
it just black screened on me.
Of course. That's how it always works. Just when you're ready to go, that's when everything falls apart. Did you have any backups from that device or a backup process in place to constantly back up what was on that machine?
No, I didn't.
Oh, that would have been perfect, wouldn't it? So now we'll get it on Windows 7. We'll get it to automatically back up every day, every hour, whatever you want to do, and then you'll be much better off.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Anthony. Let us know how that goes.
Thank you.
And,
okay, I'll play around with it.
Get those contacts back.
Thank you.
Take
have
care.
a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. Well, you hate to hear that. I've done enough XP and Windows 7 overwrites. I'm kind of used to it now that I don't want to have to go in and figure out the system files that are messed up, or I've checked the boot ini. It's fine. There's just some file deep in the system 32 directory that is corrupted. Let's just start fresh. Just grab the CD and just start fresh. Let's go to the 210 area code. Are you there, caller?
Yes, sir. If you can hear me, I am here.
I can hear you. What's your name?
Fantastic. My name is Jonathan. How you doing, pal?
Hey, Jonathan, you got a great sound coming out of there. So we hear you loud and clear.
Good. To begin with, I'm going to call you boss right now because you're part of my education on this. And what I've been doing for the past 2.5 months is preparing for the Network Plus exam, of which I passed this past Tuesday.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. My problem is this. I passed it, but implementing it in real life is going to be difficult.
Yeah, those are two different things.
That's why I'm listening to you and continuing to go over the same material again and again through repetition. I've got 2 questions for you.
Sure.
I heard about something called Raspberry Pi.
Oh, yes.
Would you know anything about that?
Oh, yes. That's a lot of fun, the Raspberry Pi. Is this one where you've already gotten one of the Raspberry Pi devices, or is this something you're looking to do something with?
I've already bought one, but I have not done anything with it yet because I'm incredibly ignorant about it. I have an idea on what on how I might be able to use it, but that's in the future. In fact, I'll tell you right now what that idea is. I'm changing fields of work from woodcrafting to computers.
Okay.
And
90
I still
seconds.
own a small business, and I was thinking Raspberry Pi being something that I could put into use for duplication of something that's made on a lathe.
Yeah.
I could be entirely wrong, but that's what came to my mind. But of course, I'm still very ignorant on how to use it, how to program it, or do whatever needs to be done to put it to use. So, aside from the book that came with it, would you have any suggestion on how I could
60 seconds.
learn more about it?
I do. A Raspberry Pi, for those of you that have not gotten into this piece, it is a someone who is trying to do to have fun with technology and to use technology in different ways. This is a very inexpensive computer. It's a very small, very tiny Linux machine that runs on its own little tiny chips. And it comes packaged into its own system. If you're watching the stream, you can see some of the pictures that were going by. I was kind of flipping around trying to find some better pictures of some of these. But there's so many different projects that people can use this with. They built their own software, and they're sharing their own software to be able to do anything. Here's one where somebody is creating an HD TV transmitter with your Raspberry Pi. They have a Twitter-controlled dice roller powered by a Raspberry Pi, where they literally have a physical pair of dice, and you can tweet and it shakes the dice around. It just gives you an idea of very, very extremes of what you can do with this device. Because it's so extensible and it is so tiny, you can do so many things with it. You know, you're not using this for gaming. This doesn't need a lot of graphics, but it's almost like having an appliance that you can build to do anything that you might want to do. You could set it up in your home to control lights and to control the temperature. You could set it up to water your grass at particular times. It can be a notification that you've got new mail or control other things on your computer. There's so much you can do with it, but it is kind of like building from scratch, where you're given the tools that you need. Now you have to put everything together to make that happen. And it's not completely straightforward. It is a hobbyist computer in probably the most ultimate sense, but you can have a lot of fun because there's so many things that people have already created out on the Raspberry Pi website, which you can find at raspberrypi.org is where you will find all of the different projects. There's a projects repository there that shows train times. It shows games that people will play on it. There is currency conversions. There's so many different things. Some people are using them in the classrooms to help people learn. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that you could take your Raspberry Pi and create a program that would have it control a lathe. That's completely within the bounds of what the Raspberry Pi could do. Do I know how to do it? Absolutely not. I have no clue where to start with that piece. I don't have one. I've seen one, and I'm really interested in the technology itself. And I've done programming before. It would be really interesting to get into that and use it. I've never done one before, or even worked with the development process on one. But you're certainly on the right track that the capability is there to do something. And I don't know, maybe somebody's already created something like that. A program that does a similar thing on Raspberry Pi already, or maybe you can find somebody who's interested in doing something like that.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. It increases my confidence in being able to do it in the future. My second question is this. I didn't write it down when you mentioned it over an hour ago, so I'll ask where I could go via the Internet to practice the setting up of a system for the Internet.
So is this specific to loading an operating system, configuring networking settings, that type of thing?
Yes, sir.
So I see two really good ways to do it. The one that I talked about in the study group is the live labs from GTS Learning. And those are labs you could purchase to have effectively virtual machines that are available to you that you can connect to anytime you want and run different applications, load one from scratch, and do a lot of things. But you can do effectively the same thing on your own computer. And if all you're doing is trying to get take a machine from bare metal and load an operating system on it and configure some settings for internet settings and have it work, you may not even need to pay for anything to make that happen. You could just as easily do that on your own computer using virtual software. The real key, of course, is you don't want to mess up what's on your computer already. You want to be able to sort of create a separate virtual world inside of your computer where you could do anything that looks and feels like its own computer, but it would never affect your machine at all, no matter what you did inside of it. You can remove partitions, you can add partitions, you can break up the operating system, you can delete files, and it has no effect on the actual host operating system that you're running on your computer. A good way to do this for absolutely free is with a program called VirtualBox. VirtualBox, and I'm trying to type very badly on my computer here. VirtualBox is a product that was created originally by Sun. Sun was purchased by Oracle. So VirtualBox is now created by Oracle. So this is a big company that now maintains this software. It's absolutely free. It's a virtual software program that you can run on your desktop, whether you're running Windows, whether you're running Mac OS 10, whether you're running Linux. You can load up VirtualBox and then create tons of other systems on your computer. VirtualBox is great for doing that. In fact, if you were to look at practically anything I do in any of my videos, I use VirtualBox to do that. So I've got VirtualBox running and configured. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different computers that I've configured on my machine that are just waiting for me to power up and use them. Some are running Windows 2008, 2012. I've got Windows 7. I've got some Linux systems. I've got Vista. I've got Windows 2000 for when I was doing the older CompTIA A+ training. And I've got all these systems. And if I want to start up a system, I just double click and it starts up Windows now running on my desktop in its own little world. It could not be easier than that. Now, this requires, of course, that you have a Windows installation manual to be able to do this. And so now my Windows has started up. We'll go full screen with that. And for those that are watching, there's my Windows. I'm now running in that Windows infrastructure. And I can do anything in this Windows. I can connect it to a domain. I can delete files. I can do whatever I want. But I had to have that Windows CD or DVD to initially install it, just as you would need a Windows CD or DVD if it was a physical computer. That part doesn't change. If you want to see how to do that, on my A+ videos, if you go to my website and look at my A+ video index, there's a video in there called Installing Windows 7. And I'm just assuming Windows 7 is a good place to start, where I start in that video with a bare, with an empty VirtualBox configuration. I build out the virtual world, and then I install Windows 7 into the virtual world. So if you want a really good example of what software to load up and a step-by-step of exactly what settings to create to make that happen, the Installing Windows 7 video is a good way to do that.
I just wrote that down, and I'll be visiting that later today. I appreciate it. I have been made aware of VirtualBox and have already downloaded it on my laptop.
Oh, good.
What I was doing was trying to set up Linux through VirtualBox.
Great.
And I was coming across a few errors, and I've yet to figure that out. But that's another thing on my agenda in the near future is to get Linux set up, as well as other virtual machines like you just spoke of, Windows. But that's in the future, one thing at a time for me.
VirtualBox supports so many different operating systems right out of the box, so to speak. In fact, if you were to just click a new button and say, what do I want to install? You can run Microsoft Windows, Linux, Solaris, which was Sun's original Unix-based operating system. So since Sun created this, it makes sense that that would be in there. BSD, which is another Unix derivative. IBM's OS2 will run on this. Mac OS X, which technically speaking is against the Apple's end-user license agreement to install this on anything other than Apple hardware, but apparently it's possible through this if you wanted to violate the law or just some other operating system. And one of the challenges with Linux, because you mentioned kind of a stumbling block there, is that Linux needs to support so many different hardware and hardware configurations. They tend to support the VirtualBox ones pretty well. VirtualBox has its own drivers for video, its own drivers for sound, its own drivers for USB, and practically any of the latest Linux distributions will be able to use that and work with it just fine. You're not going to have a problem with that at all, but you do run into other things. Linux has its own set of rules and pieces that it uses, and I don't think I have yet any of my Linux installation videos because I was working on some Linux videos as well on my website, but I haven't gotten to the installing Linux videos yet, I don't think. Configuring, booting, run levels. Nope, not yet. I do have it in my list of things, so that's one of those that's on the list. I've gotten to a point, and some people will say VirtualBox is good to a point, but they run into problems with it in certain situations. It may be that you've run into those as well. VirtualBox is an extremely good way to do this for free, but some people prefer purchasing a commercial product to do this, and practically everyone leans towards things like VMware's line of products, VMware Workstation on Windows or VMware Fusion on Mac OS X is a good example of one you can purchase. They're not expensive, like $50, and you've got commercial software. And people are probably right. I tend to see a little more a little more ease of use and a little more compatibility on VMware's commercial products than I do on the free VirtualBox. Another one you might want to try for free is VMware has a free version, VMware Player in Windows, that you could also load operating systems. It's limited in what it's able to do, but that's another good example of things you could try. Maybe your problem's VirtualBox, maybe it isn't, but it sometimes helps to have some other options available.
All right. Thank you very much. I do appreciate your time, allowing me to talk to you and your assistance.
Oh, that's a lot of fun. And when you start virtualizing, getting multiple operating systems running, you can talk to each other. You can share files between the different operating systems. That's a fantastic way to learn. Let us know how it goes.
I will do that. You have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Jonathan. Take care.
Goodbye.
And that, as you probably heard on a couple of calls before, it was counting down 90 seconds, 60 seconds. This Blog Talk Radio that I use at blogtalkradio.com is great for doing these call-in shows. They give me 2 hours a day to be able to do that. I pay them amount of money. They give me 2 hours. And I ran out of the 2 hours. So anybody who's still on the line, I can still take their calls. But if you tried to call up at this point, alas, you would not be able to get through because technically my time has run out for today. And I think since my voice is pretty much run out for today, that probably is a good place to stop the after show and the study group for today. I really am interested in getting your feedback on the study group today and what we've done with it, the different format we did. It seemed to go pretty well at the beginning there. We got some good questions. I think it was some good Q&A. I need to make them harder because you guys are too smart. That's the only thing I need to change with those pieces. If you would like to give me some feedback, you can go to the top of the Professor Messer website under Contact Us. I kind of checked my inbox here recently. I've already got a lot of messages sent from you, so I appreciate you sending those through. I will be pouring through all of those. I read all of your emails. So even if I don't respond, I've at least seen it. I promise you. But thanks for doing that. There's so much more to do. We've got another A+ study group later on in the month that we'll be doing. And maybe I can get another Network Plus study group in before the end of the month as well. That would be pretty nice to have that there and get it running. So with that, I want to thank you again for joining us. Again, follow us on YouTube at professormesser.com/YouTube. If you're interested in the study guides, they also help keep the site going. And until next time, we'll see you on the next Professor Messer Network Plus study group.